Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with TBA Rabbinic Intern, Aviva Frank.
So good to gather together and study a little Torah on Shabbat afternoon, and I'd like to dedicate our Torah study today to everyone who has a yahrzeit and is remembering someone special in their lives, so that their souls can also feast with us, feasting on Torah, and how their souls can have an aliyah. So if you open up the Siddur in front of you to page 144, this is from the Amidah that we will be saying together tonight for Ma'ariv. We're sharing copies to help save trees. And if you'll notice, there's something peculiar. If you see right on the top, it says there's some prayers that you say from December 4th to Pesach, and some you say from Pesach to December 3rd. Now this is peculiar because we know that we change at the start of the Amidah also a prayer. And if you flip the page just a few forward, 2 pages, you're going to see where we actually say something from Shmini Atzeret until Pesach. And so it just seems peculiar. Why also do we have this different day of December 4th? And as we know, it's the weekend of 6/7. Today is December 6th, Shabbat, that we just had changed this on the evening of the 4th. And if it's a leap year, we actually do it on the 5th. So we're going to explore this today of what is it about this day, December 4th, and also the fact that it's found in the secular or Gregorian calendar. It's not based on our Hebrew calendar. Peculiar, right? It's very curious. So let's take a step back first and see what does it have to do with about when we pray for rain. Because we know water is really important for us, all humans. You can only survive without water for 3 days. And that's also very telling of why when Jonah was in the big fish, that he finally broke down to God on the 3rd day and said, okay, maybe I need to stop running from you and confess and pray and change my ways. So what comes up around when we pray for water as Jewish people? So we're going to start out looking at the Mishnah. Can I have someone read for us Mishnah Tanit 1:1?
From which date does one begin to mention the might of the rains? By inserting the phrase, he makes the wind blow, rain fall. In the second blessing of the Amidah prayer, Rabbi Ezra says the phrase is inserted from the first festival day of the festival of Sukkot. Rabbi Yoshia says from the last festival day of the festival of Sukkot. Oh, did I? Rabbi Izar said, since rain is something other than men, then a sign of a curse during the festival of Sukkot, as rainfall forced Jews to leave their Sukkot. Why should one mention that it might of the rain during this period? Rabbi Ezra said to him, I too did not say that it is proper to request rain at this time, but it's proper only to mention the phrase, he makes the wind blow and rain fall. In its due time, Rabbi Yeshua said to him, if so, i.e., if reciting the phrase does not constitute a request for rain, one should always mention rain, even in the summer.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shkoya. So we have this discussion here between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua about when we should start praying for rain. And we know that we start praying for rain currently at Shmini Atzeret. We saw that in the Amidah. We also, if you've been at Shmini Atzeret, there's a whole beautiful, beautiful, bittersweet prayer that we say about calling it for rain. And there's this idea that actually waters are judged around Sukkot and on Shmini Atzeret. So that's why we want to pray for them, that there should be good judgment for the waters. We can see is water just being judged, or are we being judged how we merit water? So there's a big discussion on here of how do you celebrate and also begin praying for this water. Because you don't want to pray for the rain on Sukkot because it's considered a curse if it rains on Sukkot because people leave their sukkah. And, in the diaspora, oftentimes we might be in a sukkah and it might be raining. People in the Northeast, they might be in a sukkah and it might be snowing. Just right here, look, you're ready for the snow in the sukkah. I know even this year, I was in the sukkah and it was raining. So we don't want to pray for something too soon because we assume our prayers will be answered immediately. But there's this whole discussion here then about, well, can we mention about rain and not pray for it? And then the response is, well, then we could even just mention rain in the summer. So that's what's going on. So we're seeing around here, okay, so how soon should we start praying for rain and not just celebrating our love of water and just mentioning about water? And in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, the temples in Jerusalem, they actually have these beautiful water ceremonies during Sukkot where the water would be poured out onto the floor. It almost seemed like they were wasting water, but it was showing the trust that there would be good rains and the trust and abundance they had of the water and celebrating the water. So I'm going to read the second box, Mishnah Tanit, and it tells us a little bit about when should we start praying for rain. On the 3rd of the month of Mar Cheshvan, one starts to request rain by inserting the phrase, and give dew and rain in the blessing of the years, the 9th blessing of the Amidah. Rabbi Gamliel says one starts to request rain on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan, which is 15 days after the festival of Sukkot. Rabban Gamliel explains that one waits these extra 4 days so that the last pilgrims of the Jewish people who traveled to Jerusalem on foot for the festival, the Chag, can reach the Euphrates River without being inconvenienced by rain on their journey home. And I think that's beautiful. We want to make sure anyone that traveled by foot, because it's a pilgrimage festival, people went by foot to the Jerusalem 3 times a year, Shalosh Regalayim, the 3 festivals, they did regal by foot, that they shouldn't be rained on the way home. They shouldn't be inconvenienced. That their coming and going from the celebration should be in good health. We don't want anyone to catch a cold, All the Jewish mothers, don't catch a cold while you're celebrating the holiday. But we see here that there's something going on around playing around with the numbers and days of when to pray for rain, and I like to call that rabbi math. We also see here the mention of Mar Cheshvan. And it's just interesting to note, we're going to see this phrasing throughout the source we're looking at. But it's also peculiar because there's something special for praying for rain in Mar Cheshvan is that not constitute a holiday of sorts. So we think of Mar Cheshvan as being mar, bitter, because there's no holidays. But actually there's something special happening in Cheshvan if we're praying for rain. So many people think that the Mar Cheshvan actually had a different meaning at one point. The Mar actually can mean something different. So let's dive in a little deeper and see what comes on. I'm going to have us first skip ahead. So even though the boxes are in order of when the different documents of Jewish law were written, I want us to just skip ahead a little bit. We're going to go in time to Shulchan Aruch, and let's see what happens currently when do we actually start praying for the rain or change around an additional prayer. I'm going to read this for us. Shulchan Aruch, Orachim Chaim. The laws of the blessings of the years, containing 5 sfim regarding the blessing of the years in the rainy season, one must say in the blessing, and give dew and rain. And in the diaspora, we start to ask for rain in the evening prayer of the 60th day after the autumnal equinox. And the day of the equinox is included as day 1 of the 60-day count. And in the land of Israel, we start to ask for rain from the night of the 7th of Mar Cheshvan, and we continue to ask up until the afternoon prayer of the eve of the first Yom Tov of Pesach, and then onwards we stop asking. Wow, okay, so we have something here that we're saying is about 60th days after the autumnal equinox. And here's the peculiar thing. When is the autumnal equinox? And is it based on a date in a Jewish calendar or in the secular calendar, which now we have as the Gregorian? And what's going on here, how it's different in the diaspora than in Israel. Noticing that there's different seasons of rain in the 2 different areas. And also about what is it talking about the 7th day? What is going on? Does anyone know what happened on the 7th day of Cheshvan? Can I ask you to be my plant? I guess you're not quite a plant because I'm calling you into... Can you read for me here what happened? We're in Parshat Noach, verse 10 of chapter 7. What happened?
And on the 7th day, the waters of the flood came upon the earth.
Okay, amazing. So we have something here on the 7th day. Okay, so the flood waters started coming. But what month were we actually in? What could have happened when this was going on? So let's get a little clue. Then we look at verse 11, the next verse. We're going to find out how old Noah was and what was going on.
In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 7th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst apart, and the floodgates of the sky broke open.
Amazing. Okay, so now we get a little more context of what's going on. So it was 7 days after something, and now we find out that the floodgates of the earth opened up. All the well water came, and the skies burst open. And it was on the second month, on the 17th day, which is interesting. Does anyone know what date that was? What is the second month and the 17th day? What's the second month in the Jewish calendar? We have more than one New Year, so it could potentially be more than one day. But when do we think this day would be? Many people believe it's Cheshvan. So on the 17th of Cheshvan, the flood began from the bottom and the top. The waters that had been split, both of them surged forth. So it's not the 7th of Cheshvan, it's the 17th, but there's something interesting that's happening here. So when exactly did the flood ended, and then Noah and his family departed the ark, and then there was a brit, there was a symbol that emerged in the sky for us, a rainbow. What day did that happen? It's just interesting to think about what are these different days in Cheshvan that are occurring and when they could be. We're at chapter 8, verse 14.
And in the 7th month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry.
All right. So, and in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry, and then Noah leaves the ark. So that's the 27th of Mar Cheshvan. So they'd been on the ark for more than a year. So I just want us to hold in our minds these different days now that we have Mar Cheshvan give me importance. They're talking about the 7th, 17th, 27th. What's going on here, and how does this maybe connect then to this equinox? So we're going to go back to the third box, which is selected verses from Eruvin 56a. And how do they figure out when the autumn equinox is, these rabbis? What is up to them? And I know from looking at the time, we're not going to be able to read all of them, but I think it's just fascinating to see the rabbis dabbling in so much more than just, let's say, Torah study, but also in science and astronomy. So I want us to look at, if you go down, turn the page to similarly. So similarly, in the summer solstice occurs only at certain times of the day, either at the conclusion of 1.5 hours or 7.5 hours of the day or night. And the autumnal equinox occurs only at certain times, either at the conclusion of 3 hours or 9 hours of the day or night. And the winter solstice only occurs at certain hours, either at the conclusion of 4.5 hours or 10.5 hours of the day or night. Pretty wild, huh? And then it goes on, and all this is based on the principle that there are only 91 days and 7.5 hours between the beginning of one season and the next, as is assumed that a year is exactly 365.5 days. And similarly, each season begins precisely 1/2 planetary hour past the beginning of the previous season. There are 7 heavenly bodies that are each ascendant for an hour at a time in a constant rotation: Mercury, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and the Sun and Venus. Each season begins half an hour later in this rotation than the previous season. Pretty wild that the rabbis knew all this, or talking about it and speculating around it. And how do they figure out then when would be the autumn equinox? And then if we see below Shulchan Aruch, 60 days after that, that's when we should add in this prayer. That something's going to change. That we assume that this is the right time in the diaspora to add in additional prayers for rain. And we should note that what it says here, grant dew and rain for blessing, if you look at page 144, that actually in Sephardic communities, they ask for dew even in the summer, where we combine both for the winter. Okay? So you probably have your mind circulating around like these planetary rotations, all these different days that we've been talking about. Probably still wondering, was Mar Cheshvan always just Mars and bitter, if there were going to be these additional blessings added in for rain? And definitely the covenant with God, the Brit of the rainbow, is something special that we should celebrate. God committed that he wouldn't destroy future generations. He made a Brit with not just Noah, but all of Noah's descendants, they're including us. And the Noahide laws were established. So I want us to look at the final box really quick, and then we're going to have time for a few questions. And has anyone heard of the holiday of Seudat? Yeah, would you like to read for us this box from My Jewish Learning?
Seudat is an Ethiopian Jewish holiday celebrated on the 29th of Cheshvan, exactly 50 days after Yom Kippur. The name Seudat means prostration in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian liturgical language, but it is related to the word seged, same meaning, in Aramaic, one of the languages of the Talmud. Seudat is about accepting the Torah and yearning for Israel and the temple. It is thought to be the date on which God first revealed himself to Moses. Traditionally, members of the Beth Israel community fast on Seudat, read from their scriptures, which are called the Akhtatuch, the 5 books of Moses plus Joshua, Judges, and Ruth, recite Psalms, and pray for the rebuilding of the temple. It is also a time for renewing the Israelite covenant with God. The fast ends midday with the feast and dancing. For this reason, though it is connected to Yom Kippur, it shares many resonances with Shavuot. Since 2008, Seudat has been recognized as a state holiday in Israel. In Israel today, it is celebrated for an entire month leading up to the 29th of Cheshvan and is an opportunity to raise Ethiopian Jewish visibility and educate Israeli Jews about Beta Israel customs.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for reading. It's a beautiful celebration, and I was very fortunate to be able to attend one year when I was living in Jerusalem. I lived in Israel during the pandemic, but pre-pandemic I was able to attend, and it's so beautiful because it's a holiday now for everyone in Israel, and especially to go where they celebrate. It's near Talpiot, overlooking the old city of Jerusalem, where they have the main celebration. And Seudat is about prostration or surrender, submission. And in modern Hebrew, it also is connected to the same word that they pull from Aramaic and from the Ethiopian language. And it's just beautiful because it has in it the elements of like a renewal of a brit, a covenant, the contract, connections to fasting and then celebration of Yom Kippur, this abundant celebration similar to Shavuot, and also a prayer for water, for rain. That is so important. And it's celebrated 50 days after Yom Kippur. And I think it's just interesting to also see how they're counting different time period from Yom Kippur 50 days. Can anyone think of another holiday that we count 50 days from a Jewish holiday? It doesn't have a fixed time. It's only 50 days after.
From Pesach to Shavuot.
Exactly. So that's also it as elements to Shavuot. And it's just interesting that we're talking about when we add this prayer in, that we started on December 4th, that it's 60 days after the equinox of autumn, and also here we're having 50 days after Rosh Hashanah, and how that comes to 20th of Cheshvan. So all these different holidays and different time periods and dates around water that are in our tradition. So I just want to hear some reflections that people might have about this. How does this maybe impact your relationship if you have our own rain or water? In California, I know it rains and we get all scared. We think we're melting. You know, we love the rainbow because somewhere over the rainbow, but we also are very afraid when it rains. But we also know we really need water here because we are constantly trying. Yeah, we're in a drought. We're constantly putting off a drought. So any thoughts anyone wants to share? Any questions that have bubbled forth?
If you look on the very bottom of page 142, A or B in the Siddur, you'll see that from Pesach Shmini Atzeres, some add Morid Hatal, referring to dew. And so that's you'd add that in the place in the same point in the Amidah where right now we say Mashiv Haruach Morid Hagashem. I personally, right? Yeah, that's why it says some people add. Right. I picked it up. I started doing that as soon as I learned of the existence of the Slim Shalom. So I haven't seen any other Siddur prior to this one.
Yeah, right? Isn't it? Because we incorporate in the conserved movement both traditions we have as Sephardic and Ashkenazi communities, and that people feel belonging and connection.
It makes sense that an agrarian society is consumed by rain. It just
Hold that thought, please say that into the mic.
No, I said it makes sense that an agrarian society is
overly concerned about rain, because rain is what makes crops, and you can't live without rain. We're less constrained. We still need rain, but we're less constrained. But in a time where, trade was minimal and you depending on your agrarian society, rain was much more important than it is. Still important, but not as much as it was in ancient times.
Right, exactly. And when we had been slaves in Egypt, we had saw how the Egyptians really worshipped the Nile, because the Nile would overflow, and that provided them the water they needed for their crops. And suddenly we entered a land of Israel, and we no longer had manna. We no longer had the man. We no longer had Miriam's well with water. We no longer had the cloud of glory. And suddenly we realized we had to pray for rain. We had to be fully reliant on rain, and also fully then reliant on our Creator, our God, to beseech that blessing.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.